Well, last week I called you guys and I asked you what would convince you of God's existence. You said nothing.
I don't think anyone said that. But I can tell you, and this is again another trite answer, John, I don't know what would convince me that a God exists. But if a God exists and that God cared about my belief and wanted me to believe, that God, if it's powerful enough, could present me with evidence that would convince me. Yeah. And thus far, has not done so. Your call isn't helping.
I will go through his statements, one point at a time. I don't know what would convince me that a God exists. If you don't know what it would take to convince you that God exists, then why are atheists getting upset that Christians are so adamant that God does exist? Also, if you don't know what it would take to convince you, then why do you and other atheists get irritated when you ask a believer in God a question and you're not satisfied with their answer and you just mock them and laugh at them? If you really wanted to be convinced that God exists, you would allow yourself the possibility to be convinced and be open-minded. But because you said you don't know what would convince you, that means you're not open-minded to receive it. You don't know because you don't want to know and you don't want to surrender your mind openly so God can prove it to you. And the proof of God is so simple. It's according to logic and scientific observation with consistency. Proof and evidence is according to logic, which functions with consistency. It's very easy to see, if God opens your eyes to it. Which if you claim God has not opened your eyes to it, then that means you are never going to see it because you don't want to. Or you're not ready to see it yet and God has to do something drastic to you to get you to surrender. Remember, God has 3 ways to deal with you in this order. He will bend you to his will, he will break you, and when that doesn't work, he will bury you. His last statements, but if a God exists and that God cared about my belief and wanted me to believe, that God, if it's powerful enough, could present me with evidence that would convince me. And thus far, has not done so. Your call is helping. This is a common straw man argument. They insist that if God does exist then he would know what it would take to convince me, and he would provide the proof and cause me to believe. But because he hasn't done so, that's proof he does not exist, or at least most likely he doesn't. If God does exist then that means he is infinite in intellectuality. He's not stupid, easily conned, or fooled. He knows you more than you know you. If he knows what it would take to convince you, he would do it at the right time. There's only 2 reasons why he hasn't showed you the convincing proof. 1. Because he knows your entire life, and he knows nothing he says or does is going to convince you anyways. If you reject the simple proof-like nature of the creation, the conscience of God's law written on our hearts, and the scripture along with the archaeology and scientific findings that support the scripture, there's no way you're going to accept a big miracle of God. It would not matter if he stood in your room and declared himself God to you. You still would not believe him. You'll find some wimpy unscientific conclusion like a hallucination, you were dreaming, it was a flashback, you were half asleep, etc. You will find some weak detour to dismiss him anyways. 2. The second reason why he has not shown the proof to you is because you're not ready to receive it. And he knows it's going to have to be severe. Does he have to put you in a hospital or give you a bad disease or take things and people away from you to open your eyes? Remember, God always deals with people by his goodness first. When that does not work, he will begin cursing you and taking things away, bit by bit, until there is nothing left except you and God. This clip is an example of this.
On Thursday, I was in severe agony. So much pain, I did once ask for God. Only once.
Was he there?
I only ever asked for anything once in my life. And he didn't do anything for me.
It's the convincing of the mind that if God would just take this pain away from me, if he would not go over this glass of water, if he would move this chair, if he would move this table, if he would appear in my room with all his glorious light shining around him telling me who he is, I would believe. You're fooling yourself and you're setting yourself up to be disappointed because God knows you very well. Again, he knows that even if he did do that you would still reject him. Look at the children of Israel in the Old Testament. God did miracle after miracle and they still rebelled against him. A person who refuses logical evidence is somebody that is practicing willful ignorance and exercising stupidity. They are dumb on purpose. This sort of person will never accept any kind of proof because they don't want to see it and accept it. Trying to convince this person is like trying to convince a person who denies a chair in the room actually exists when we know it does. It doesn't matter what logical proof is shown to you, you will still reject it. This question has been tossed to many people: if the Bible were true, would you become a Christian? Most of the time people say no. And that's proof right there. It doesn't matter if the Bible is true, and it does not matter if God is real, you would still choose to go to hell and reject him rather than to surrender to him. And these people who reject logical evidence think themselves to be so intellectual, when they are not, because Scripture is clear that the fear of God is the beginning of knowledge and wisdom, which is intellectuality. You expect people to take you seriously. These people who practice willful ignorance and still claim to be atheists should not be taken seriously, but with a grain of salt. Which is why we don't believe schizophrenic people when they tell us about their friends. How about you stop BSing us and just tell it like it is? You don't believe in God and you won't accept proof because you don't want God to exist. You don't want him to exist because if he did you would have to be submissive to him and do what he says. You don't want anybody telling you what to do. Which is very hypocritical because you let a bunch of people on earth tell you what to do. From your boss to the police to the governor to the president of the United States. You will always have somebody over you telling you what to do. So you will let them order you around but not God. That's very hypocritical and double standard. You don't want God to exist because you don't want him telling you what to do about your personal life. Stop making up all these excuses, that is just nonsense. Just be honest. You refuse to believe in any higher power because you know that a higher power, God, has rules and expectations. And you refuse to obey them. If your answer is, well, the party is in hell and I would rather burn in hell than bow down to your God, that's fine. He has a hot fiery place for you and everybody else who refuses to listen to him. And when he turns you away and you send yourself to hell, you have none to blame but yourself. In that case I have no sympathy for you.